You are watching the most watched sporting event on the planet. Billions of eyes, billions of screens, one ball. But the real answer to how this all started is far stranger than you think. It almost didn't happen. The tournament you know today, the one that stops entire countries, the one that makes grown adults cry in the streets, the one that turns strangers into brothers for 90 minutes, it came within inches of never existing at all. And the man who built it was nearly destroyed by it. His name was Jules Rimet. And in 1928, he had an idea so radical that most of the football world thought he was insane. Think about what the world looked like back then. There was no television, no internet, no commercial flights connecting continents. Traveling from South America to Europe took weeks on a ship. Communication between nations was slow, expensive, and unreliable. Football was a sport, not a global language, not a religion, just a sport. And yet Jules Rimet looked at all of that and said, let us gather the best teams from every nation on earth and have them compete for a single trophy. The reaction was not enthusiasm, it was ridicule. FIFA, the body Rimet himself led as president, had only a handful of members in the 1920s. Most of the powerful European football associations saw international competition as a distraction. The British associations, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, had already walked out of FIFA entirely in a dispute over amateurism. They wanted nothing to do with it. Do you understand what that means? The country that invented modern football refused to participate. England, the nation that wrote the rules that gave the world the game, sat out the first World Cup entirely. So who was left? Rimet had to build his tournament from almost nothing. He needed a host nation. He needed teams willing to make the voyage. He needed money. He needed a trophy. He needed belief. The host nation problem almost killed the project before it started. Several European countries bid to host, but when the FIFA Congress voted in 1929, something unexpected happened. Uruguay won. Uruguay, a country of barely 2 million people on the southeastern tip of South America. But here is why it made sense. Uruguay had just won football gold at the 1924 and 1928 Olympics. They were, by any measure, the best team on the planet. And they were willing to pay for everything. Travel costs, accommodation, stadium construction. They built an entire stadium from scratch in under a year, the Estadio Centenario, a monument to a century of Uruguayan independence. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became a crisis. European nations refused to go. The journey was too long, the season would be disrupted, the cost was too high. Association after association sent their apologies. Rimet spent months on the phone, in offices, on ships, begging. He called in every favour he had. He wrote letters, he made promises, he argued, pleaded, and cajoled. In the end, only 4 European nations agreed to make the trip: France, Belgium, Yugoslavia, and Romania. Romania's participation only happened because King Carol II personally ordered the national team to go and promised the players their jobs would be waiting when they returned. A king had to intervene just to get a team to show up. The psychologist Daniel Won, who has studied sports fandom for decades, argues that international sporting competitions tap into something ancient in the human brain, a tribal need to see your group succeed against another. But in 1930, that tribal pull had not yet attached itself to the World Cup. People didn't know what they were watching. They didn't know it would matter. 13 teams. 13. That is how many competed in the first World Cup. The tournament began on July 13, 1930. The first ever World Cup match was played between France and Mexico. France won 3-0. Lucien Laurent scored the very first goal in World Cup history in the 19th minute. He was a factory worker from Paris who had never expected to play for his country at all. He lived to be 97 years old, and for the rest of his life, people stopped him in the street to talk about that moment. Now consider what happened next, because this is where the story gets strange. Uruguay reached the final, so did Argentina. 2 neighbouring nations, separated only by the Rio de la Plata River, facing each other for the biggest prize in football. The rivalry between these 2 countries was already fierce, violently, passionately fierce. The Argentine Football Federation was so suspicious of playing in Uruguay that they demanded a neutral referee. A Belgian official named John Langenus was appointed. He agreed to referee only on one condition, that his personal safety could be guaranteed. Let that settle in. The referee agreed to officiate the first ever World Cup final only after being promised he would not be harmed. Over 30,000 Argentine fans crossed the river by boat to watch. Uruguayan fans surrounded the stadium. Police were everywhere. Both teams argued over which ball to use. Seriously, they argued about the ball. In the end, each half was played with a different ball, one from each country. Uruguay won 3-2. The final scoreline does not tell you about the chaos that followed. Uruguay declared a national holiday. Argentina closed its border with Uruguay. The Uruguayan consulate in Buenos Aires was stoned by the crowd. A football match had nearly started a diplomatic incident between two nations, and Jules Rimet stood in the middle of it all, holding the small golden trophy he had commissioned, a statue now called the Jules Rimet Trophy. The same trophy that would one day be stolen in England in 1966, recovered by a dog named Pickles sniffing around a garden hedge, and eventually stolen again in Brazil in 1983, this time never to be found. The historian Tony Mason, in his landmark study of football and South American society, described the 1930 World Cup not as a sporting event, but as a political earthquake disguised as a game. He argued that what Rimet had actually created was a machine for producing national identity at a scale no government had ever achieved. He was right, but Rimet could not have known that yet. The second World Cup in 1934 was held in Italy under Mussolini, the third in 1938 in France, under the shadow of a continent sliding toward war. Then nothing. The tournament went dark for 12 years as the world tore itself apart. When the World Cup returned in 1950 in Brazil, something had shifted. The British associations had rejoined FIFA. The world had been through enough. People needed something that was just a game, something that mattered and also didn't matter at all. Brazil built the Maracanã, the largest football stadium ever constructed, holding over 200,000 people. They expected to win. The whole country expected to win. Uruguay beat them 2-1 in the final match of the tournament. The silence that fell over the Maracanã that day has been described by those who were there as the most terrifying sound they had ever heard. The sound of 200,000 people having their hearts broken at exactly the same moment. That moment has a name in Brazil, the Maracanazo, the blow of the Maracanã. It is still spoken about today as a national wound that never fully healed. The sociologist Eduardo Archetti spent years studying how football became tangled up with national identity across Latin America, and he concluded something that would have seemed absurd in 1928. He found that football matches, more than wars, more than elections, more than any political event, were the moments when ordinary people felt most strongly who they were and where they came from. Jules Rimet died in 1956. He had lived long enough to see his impossible idea become the most watched event in human history. He had lived long enough to see countries stop fighting wars during World Cup matches, to see dictators use the tournament to launder their reputations, to see ordinary people weep openly in public for something that was only a game. He had also lived long enough to see England finally enter the tournament in 1950, lose to the United States in one of the greatest upsets in sporting history, and return home in total humiliation. There is a kind of justice in that, because what Jules Rimet understood, and what the British associations failed to understand in 1930, was that this was never really about football. It was about something older and deeper, the need to belong to something, the need to believe that the place you were born matters, the need to stand in a crowd of strangers who all want the same thing you want. That need did not begin with a tournament in Uruguay in 1930. It began long before anyone had words for, but the World Cup gave it a name, and a trophy, and a schedule every 4 years that the whole planet rearranges its life around. Tonight, a child is kicking a ball against a wall and imagining a stadium. They have never heard of Jules Rimet. They do not know that a king once ordered a team onto a ship, or that a referee once asked for his safety to be guaranteed before he would agree to blow a whistle. They just know the game. And they know, somehow, that it matters.